Hey there, I'm here to help you name 10 books with this Narci Fable Singer deck tech. Today we're going to talk about one of my all-time favorite commanders, Narci Fable Singer. She is an Abzan Enchantress commander which primarily focuses on sagas. And jumping right into it, let's read off her abilities. Narci is a legendary creature human bard who is a 3/3 for 1 and Abzan mana. She has lifelink and 2 additional abilities. The first is whenever you sacrifice an enchantment, draw a card. And the second one is whenever the final chapter ability of a saga you control resolves, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is that saga's mana value. And generally with Narci, you want to put a bunch of enchantments onto the battlefield, preferably sagas, and then when those sagas resolve, you'll get card advantage and also drain the table for their life. Now, when it comes to saga-focused strategies or saga commanders, I feel like there are two major playstyles. The first one is counter manipulation, adding saga counters or lore counters and then removing them. And Tom Bombadil is a very good example of that. And the reason being is Tom Bombadil wants to have 4 or more lore counters on sagas that you control. And that means that Tom wants to have many sagas on board at once. He always wants to have at least 2 or 3 sagas on board so he can maintain his hexproof and indestructible while resolving other sagas to trigger his second ability. Narci, on the other hand, I believe wants to resolve the sagas as fast or as soon as possible so she can make use of both her first and second ability. And here we are on Moxfield. This is my Narci deck list, and just like last video, we're going to talk and highlight all the important cards for each of the card types. Now, before we get into that, I just want to quickly mention protection pieces for this deck, and I think having Narci protected is extremely important to the success of this deck. Narci is what is known as a monolith commander, and for those of you who don't know, monolith commanders are commanders that absolutely need to be on the battlefield for the deck to run as smoothly as possible. The entire strategy of the deck revolves around the commander, and the deck is very centralized around that game plan. And with monolith commanders, you need to protect them at all costs or your deck doesn't really get to do the thing. So we have a few different instances of protection for this deck, and we have 2 creatures. I've been experimenting with more and less, but this is where I've landed at the time of recording this video. Now, the first one is Alcyte of Life's Bounty. This one is very standard for Narci decks. It is a 1 mana, pay 1, sacrifice it, and target creature or enchantment gets protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. So this is really good on multiple different aspects. The first, it is an enchantment itself, so it synergizes well with that. When you sacrifice it, it'll trigger Narci's first ability, so you can get a card, while also protecting a key creature or enchantment that you control, mainly Narci, but this can also be used to protect in a very important saga that's about to resolve, or one of the other creatures. I mean, this deck isn't very creature focused, but the creatures that are on board are very necessary to accelerating the game plan. The next one is a card you're all probably very familiar with. It is Mother of Runes. Mother of Runes is also 1 white mana, and you can tap her. Target creature gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. So very standard stuff there. Mother of Runes is a very strong card and does quite well in this deck. Next up, we have the Instance. So for Instance, we have a few. Heroic Intervention is just like a green staple card that protects everything, or all of your permanents rather. And this one I wouldn't really consider as much protection for Narci specifically, just more so your board state. More targeted ones are cards like Revitalizing Repass, which is a 2-color MDFC for Modern Horizons 3. This one only gives Indestructible, but it can become a land, so it is quite a flexible card. Next, we have Tamiyo's Safekeeping and Tyvar Stand. These both give target creature hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Tamiyo's gains life, and then Tyvar's you can pump up a creature as well. Now, I think these cards are usually very overplayed in green decks, but in the case of Narci, I do think this sort of protection package is justifiable. She is a monolith commander, as I mentioned before, so having her on the battlefield as long as possible is very helpful to execute your game plan more smoothly. In terms of sagas, we do have one saga that gives some form of protection, and that is Tale of Tynuvial. It is 3 and 2 white, and the first chapter ability is target creature you control gains indestructible for as long as you control the saga. So you'll have Narci be indestructible for about 2 turns. I'm not really using this on anybody else, and this sort of protection is just a little added bonus. Okay, so let's get into the card types. And the first one is going to be creatures. Now, there's only 14 creatures in the deck, and although there's not many, a lot of them are very strong. But we're only going to highlight 3 of them for now. And the first one, and arguably the most important card in the deck, is Barbara Wright. Now, Barbara Wright is a legendary human advisor from the Doctor Who set. She costs 1 and a white, and she is a 1/3 stat line. Her ability is History Teacher. Sagas you control have read ahead. And if you're not aware of what read ahead is, it allows your sagas to start with as many lore counters as you want them to when they enter the battlefield. So if you have a saga that you really want the last ability for and you don't care or want to wait the turns for the first 2, you can just skip and spark notes ahead to the last one. So this ability is very good with Narci because she wants the sagas to resolve usually as fast as possible. And Barbara Wright helps trigger both Narci's first and second ability very consistently. She also is really good in a flexible toolbox sense where different sagas obviously have very different abilities from 1 to 3 or however many is the final chapter, and this allows you to pick and choose which abilities you really want and also helps your timing on when you get the saga abilities to trigger. So Barbara Wright, absolutely amazing card, definitely recommend for any saga deck. The next creature is going to be Yenna, Redtooth Regent. She's 2 and a Selesnya for a 4/4 legendary elf noble, and her ability is 2 and tap. Choose target enchantment you control that doesn't have the same name as another permanent you control, and then you create a token of it that isn't legendary. If the token is an aura, you untap her, and then you scry 2. You can only activate this ability as a sorcery. And Yenna is amazing because she allows you to make many copies of plenty of the different enchantments in the deck. If I need to have extra protection for Narci, I can make a copy of Alseid of Life's Bounty. If there's a saga that I really like on board and I want to double up on the effect, I can copy that. I could also copy something like a Demon of Fate's Design, which I'll talk about more in a second, but that way I have 2 6/6 Flamplers instead of 1. Yenna is really great at accruing tons of value for the enchantments and the board state. The last creature I want to talk about is Demon of Fate's Design. Demon of Fate's Design is 4 and 2 black for a 6/6 enchantment flampling demon. Once during each of your turns, you may cast an enchantment spell by paying life equal to its mana cost instead of paying its mana cost. And the second ability is 2 and a black. To sacrifice another enchantment, it gets plus X plus O until end of turn, where X is the sacrificed enchantment's mana value. And I think this card is very good in Narci for multiple reasons. One, it is a 6/6 flying body that can trample over any blockers, which is very useful. It's an enchantment creature itself, so it helps synergize with anything that needs enchantments. And it also allows you to cast sagas, which tend to be on the more expensive side mana-wise, essentially for free. And Narci gains so much life throughout the course of the game of Commander, where paying 6 life, paying 5 life is not actually that big of a deal. And this card has gotten me out of a lot of sticky situations just based on the first ability alone. It also has the added bonus of being a sack outlet for the enchantments that you have while also pumping it. Now, I don't use the second ability as much, but if you get a very large CMC enchantment like the War in Heaven, which is a 6-mana enchantment, this will become a 12/6 Flampler, and you'll also get the Narci draw as well. So, very useful creature, and I highly recommend it for Narci decks. Since there aren't that many that I haven't talked about already, I'm going to pair instants and sorceries together. Now, with sorceries, it's very simple. We have 2 pieces of mass recursion and 2 pieces of ramp. Very basic nature's lore and 3 visits. I think adding things like Sky Shroud Claim could also be quite useful, especially if you have access to the shock lands or anything with multiple types. So very standard there. Don't need to get into that. Next up, we have the Mass Recursion, as I just mentioned. We have Brilliant Restoration and Eerie Ultimatum. Both of these allow you to return any or all permanents from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, Eerie Ultimatum focuses on any with different names, and Brilliant Resto focuses on artifacts and enchantments. Now, these paired with something like Barber Right can instantly kill a table as long as Narci's out. And although they're quite hefty, since you're going through all of your enchantment sagas, they're all going to your graveyard. Bringing them back out with one of these 2 spells is a great finisher for a game. After that, we have the instants. I don't run that many instants in the deck. Like I said before, it's mainly protection pieces, or now we have removal. So we have Deadly Rollick, Path to Exile, Stroke of Midnight, and Swords to Plowshares. I think the deck could definitely use more removal. There are several removal pieces tied to sagas themselves, so I tried to focus on the synergy of the deck and making the interaction based on sagas despite it being sorcery speed, and just adding a lot of the very strong staples in the instant slot. Now, Deadly Rollick is obviously extremely broken. Since we have Narci on the board so often, or the goal is to have Narci out there, Deadly Rollick is a lot easier to cast. I don't need to talk about Swords and Path and Stroke of Midnight. I did run Generous Gift for a while, but I think I like having the opponent get a 1/1 over the 3/3 at the cost of it being a little bit less wide in what it can target. After that, we're going to talk about artifacts. There's nothing to highlight here. It's your very standard Signet, Felwar Stone, Soul Ring. I don't have talismans in the deck. I don't think they're that necessary, especially because there's a lot of ramp pieces within sagas and also the ramp spells above. So let's get into the main event of the deck, and that is the enchantment section. Now, this is an Enchantress deck, so there's going to be quite a few of those. And this is a Saga deck, so we run 34 enchantments that are non-creatures. And out of those 34, we have 23 of them that are sagas. And instead of going over like each individual saga, which would take a million years because of the amount of text on sagas themselves, I'm just going to make some like highlights and key points and go over those. So the first thing is, I do not run flip sagas in this deck. I've tried it many times. I've been phasing them out because I find them to not be very good in Narci, and this is for a multitude of reasons. The first one is because the saga abilities themselves aren't actually that good. They don't really get you very much aside from 1 or 2 of them, and the backside of them, they're most of the time enchantment creatures, and the enchantment creatures are also pretty lackluster. So would I rather have a middling creature or get card draw out of it? I would almost certainly always get card draw, and that leads me to the second reason, which is flip sagas only trigger Narci's second ability. They do not trigger the card draw sacrifice ability, because when they hit their final chapter, they exile themselves and flip. So you do get the life drain and gain, but most of the time it's only like 2 or 3 life, and that's not really a meaningful life swing. So I think with all of those factors in play, running flip sagas I just don't think are worth it unless you have a budgetary constraint, which I don't think sagas themselves are generally that expensive of cards anyways, though. Next, we're going to highlight the most valuable sagas in the deck, at least from my opinion. And the first one is going to be The Cruelty of Gix. This is 3 and 2 black for a 3-chapter saga with read ahead. And because it innately has read ahead, we don't need Barbara Wright on board to get and pick and choose which saga ability we want to trigger. But the first one is a targeted single target hand hate that focuses on creatures or planeswalkers. So you choose a creature or planeswalker from their hand and they are forced to discard it. The second ability is a tutor, where you can tutor any card, put it into your hand, and you lose 3 life. And the last one is put target creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Most of the time, you're going to read ahead to 2. Being able to tutor the best card in your deck and then reanimate the best card in anybody's graveyard is just very powerful. After that, we have 3 blind mice. Now, this is 2 and a white for a 4-chapter saga. The first one makes a 1/1 white mouse token. The second and third create a token that is a copy of target token that you control. And then the third one, or the fourth one rather, is creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. Now, what makes this one so strong is it is a part of a combo. The second and third chapter abilities allow you to create copies of tokens, and with this and some of the other cards in the deck, you can essentially make infinite copies of 3 blind mice for infinite triggers of the saga ability, as well as infinite triggers of Narci's first and second ability. Now, this combo requires quite a few cards. I believe it's Yenna, Red Tooth Regent, 3 blind mice. You need Barbara Wright on board, and then you need some way to manipulate counters while having Narci on the battlefield as well. So this is a very taxing combo. Yenna also needs to not have summoning sickness, and you need to have enough mana to do all this stuff. But essentially the way the combo works is you play 3 blind mice. It doesn't matter which saga ability you want to trigger. Then you use Yenna's tap ability to create a copy of 3 blind mice. That copy of 3 blind mice will read ahead to chapters 2 or 3, and you'll create a copy of itself because it can only target token copies. You'll basically do this as many times as possible to create a bunch of 3 blind mice token copies that copy themselves, and with some sort of counter manipulation like Evolution Sage or Karn's Bastion, and even using a card like Satsuki the Living Lore without summoning sickness, you add a counter to all of those copies and kill the table with Narci's ability. You do have to be careful to not create too many copies of 3 blind mice so you don't deck yourself with Narci's first ability, but most of the time 10 to 15 copies of 3 blind mice should absolutely do the trick. You would be draining everybody for 45, and you would gain 45 life, as well as drawing 45 cards, so that is most of the time overkill, but 3 blind mice is a great finisher and combo piece. If you happen to get the cards required to do so, though, that is definitely a rarity, even with some tutors. We're not really tutoring for this combo at all. We're mainly tutoring for value pieces because you don't need to combo off with this deck to win. Most of the time, Narci's passive life drain will do the trick for you. Now, after the important sagas, I'm just going to talk about some of the non-saga enchantments. The first ones we're going to talk about are the removal-based ones. So this is the Seals and then Soul Snare. So we have Seal of Primordium and Seal of Cleansing. These are both 1 and their colored mana to have an enchantment that sacks, destroy target artifact or enchantments. Now, these synergize with Narci quite well because you not only spot remove an enchantment or target artifact, but you also get to draw cards from it as well. Now, there is another one called Seal of Doom that allows you to destroy a non-black creature. I'm currently experimenting with not running that because I like the creature removal that we have in the instance category a bit better, and there are some sagas like Binding of the Old Gods that do get rid of creatures as well. The other one is Soul Snare. This is kind of like a Swords to Plowshares on a stick, basically. It's just 1 white, and then you can pay 1 white, sacrifice it, exile target creature that's attacking you or planeswalker you control. This thing is basically like a loaded gun that you have at all times. And I think the rate is not very good. Obviously, you want something that you can surprise them with at instant speed, but you can use this as like a politics tool, and it is a way to get card draw via Narci while also doubling as removal. Obviously, we have Smothering Tithe in here. If you wanted to make the deck significantly cheaper, you would absolutely cut this. I don't think this card is super necessary, but obviously it is quite strong. The cost of many of these sagas are quite expensive, and this helps mitigate the slowed pace from those CMCs. After this, we have Sylvan Library. Sylvan Library is, of course, a classic, very strong enchantment, allowing you to potentially draw extra cards at the cost of your life. The life loss is mitigated pretty heavily by Narci's ability to gain a ton of life throughout a game. So I use this one mainly as card filtering, and then if I absolutely need a card, obviously I will draw it at the cost of 4 life. Aside from the pretty common staples for enchantment decks, or just green and white decks in general, we have Historian's Boon. This is 3 and a white, and when it ETBs or another non-token enchantment ETBs, you make a 1/1. And when a saga finishes, you make a 4/4 white angel with flying and vigilance. So this will help you mitigate the issue of the lack of creatures that the deck has. This will make a ton of tokens and hopefully a lot of 4/4 flying angels. And I like this card. There's another card called Boon of the Spirit Realm that I was running for a little bit, but I wanted to cut one of those two, despite them doing slightly different things. This one helps you get more bodies on board, as well as flying blockers. So I like this one a little bit more, and it does have a decent amount of synergy with sagas themselves, especially because we're going to be resolving the last and final chapter of them quite often. Lastly, for the non-saga enchantments, we have Starfield of Nyx. This card is a way to beat down in combat if you have a flood of enchantments on board. This turns enchantments into creature enchantments, where their power and toughness is their mana value, and the threshold for that is controlling 5 or more enchantments. So the only things not getting affected by this ability are Starfield of Nyx itself, as well as any aura enchantments that you may have. Now, this spell is definitely quite slow. It requires 5 mana, and you need to reach your upkeep, so you have to untap with it. But this does continue the slow train of sagas and allows you to always have a saga up if possible, while giving you the opportunity to swing out and go wide with many of the enchantments that you may have populating your board. Okay, so let's now talk about win cons and how does the deck win. I've already mentioned many of these already. We have the Starfield of Nyx combat damage. We have the Saga copying combo with Barbara Wright and 3 Blind Mice. And we have the Mass Recursion with Barbara Wright and Narci to just full sweep the board. But this deck is also just really good at passively killing people with cards like Bloodletter of Aclazotz that makes people lose double the amount of life on your turn. And this pairs very well with Narci's final ability. We also can swing high using cards like All That Glitters or Strength of the Harvest, which is a multicolor MGFC from Modern Horizons 3. It's a green-white one, which is very nice, but it also has the same effect as All That Glitters, pumping a creature based on enchantments. But instead of artifacts, this one also counts creatures, which is quite nice because a lot of sagas tend to make many small creature tokens. So we can attach these things to Narci to make her extremely tall, where she's a massive life-linking creature, or we can add it to things like Demon of Fate's design, where we have a flying trampler that can just swing out and insta-kill somebody while being like a 25/25 or so on. So that's going to be it for the Narci Fablesinger deck tech. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and checking out how I play this amazing Enchantress commander. I am planning on doing a few different things for the upcoming videos, but once again, thank you all so much for watching. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, and peace out.